It's now time for us to hear from a very special friend of the Stronger Smarter Institute, Professor Russell Bishop from the University of Waikato. He is the Foundation Professor for Māori Education in the School of Education at the University of Waikato, Hamilton. He is currently the Project Director for the Te Kotahitanga, I hope I got that right, Russell, a large New Zealand Ministry of Education funded research professional development project that seeks to improve the educational achievement of Māori students in mainstream classrooms throughout the implementation of a culturally responsive pedagogy of relations and culturally responsive leadership. He's also the author of 7 books and 80 other quality assured publications and has delivered over 100 keynote addresses nationally and internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome Professor Russell Bishop.
Good morning, and kia ora no tātou. A kanuri miki a koutou te ata nei, nō reira, he wā mō te haki mō tātou, koina he wā, he whakamaumaharatanga mō tātou, mō ngā tini aitua tātou, o ngā mate o tātou, i tēnei wā hoki. Huri au ki te iwi o kōnei, mana whenua o tēnei, a tēnā koutou e o koutou manaakitanga kia hau, i tēnei ata, nō reira tēnā koe tēnā koutou. Koutou mā. Koutou mā, e hui mai, e raro te koro ai o tātou ariki, ake, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou. Good morning. Just saying good morning to and acknowledging the traditional owners of this land and thanking the elder who welcomed us here this morning and acknowledging all of you who are here, who are gathered under the umbrella or the cloak of the one above, our Creator, and just saying thanks to you all really for welcoming me here. If you have trouble with the accent, it's okay. We're not on television enough, are we? I was here in July, and I spoke to a conference of Indigenous educators. Was anybody there? Oh, great, okay. Well, when I left in July, I went back to New Zealand, and I flew here from Brisbane Airport back home, and I live about an hour and a half south of Auckland, and I've got a bit of a deal. I want to get home after a conference like this, right? I've been away for a week or so, and I'm really keen to get home. So I get off the plane, I've got my bag under my arm, I'm racing out the door, I race through customs, the passport thing goes down. I then go to the immigration, nothing there, out you go. And then I arrive up and I thought, right, all I got to do is pick up the car. So I go up to the rental car counter. I say, my name's Bishop, throw me the keys, I'm out of here. Your car's at the domestic terminal. Oh, was my response. The question then was, didn't you specify? And the guy says, didn't you specify the international terminal when you arrived, when you booked it? And I said, no. I think you can get the point pretty well straight away that by the second interaction between myself and this person who was working behind the counter of the rental car company, I become sarcastic and slightly aggressive and signalling that I was rather ticked off. Now, it's good to hear Chris talking this morning about the centrality of relationships. And then our man from the bank, even better, said that what the message of Stronger Smarter actually applies to the corporate world. And I quite agree with you, it does, it should apply to the corporate world because here you've got a breakdown in relationships within two iterations, within 2 interactions. Immediately I am becoming sarcastic and rude and the person is blaming me for being the cause of the problem. It gets worse. I then said, can you get me a car? Can you send a car over here? And the guy says, oh, let me check. Nah, it's going to take 20 minutes. So I said, have you got another car here? So then I get over to the domestic terminal. I'm starting to get a wee bit, steam's coming out the ears by this stage. And I get over there and this is what I get. Now picture this. I've arrived off the plane, I've got 2 bags, one computer bag and one overnight bag, and I've got the duty frees that my wife asked me to buy on the way, and that's hanging off one bag, and I've got a thing under this arm, and I've got a newspaper under this arm, and she says, here's your key, there's your car, it's way over there. So I went, where will I put this key, lady? So here's an alternative scenario for the corporate world. It's a different world, isn't it? Could be a different world. What's this got to do with education? It's got a lot to do with the corporate world. And you might think that I'm at the wrong conference and I'm actually should be at the Hertz conference or something like that. But this has got something to do with education, because what it's about is the blame game. The rental car agent initially blamed me for having the problem. For there is a problem, the car's not there. So he said it was your problem, it's your fault. And then the next thing, he took no responsibility for solving the problem. The result was that we developed a very tense standoff relationship very quickly. He tried to blame somebody else, and then he claimed powerlessness. Is this familiar? It's enormously familiar to me. The agency game, of course, is the second scenario, was where the rental car agent actually says that there is something that he can do, takes responsibility, and solves the problem. Now, what's this got to do with education? Well, it's got a lot to do with it, because in 2001, when we started the program to Kotahitanga, and good pronunciation there, my friend, we started off by actually engaging in conversations with community members, families of Maori children themselves, their families, their school principals and their teachers. And we asked them all, what is your experience of being engaged in the education of young Maori people? What's your experience of being parents and so on and so forth? And then we went through and we developed a whole series of narratives of experience, and from this we did an analysis. And the analysis showed us that people actually drew upon 3 sets of ideas when they explained their experiences of interacting with Māori or being Māori students, being Māori adults or students. And they were either talking about it being the child that had the major influence over achievement, or it was the structure of the school, or it was the relationship that went on in the classroom. So when we did a unit analysis of ideas, and we said, so what is actually going on in these schools? And we said to the children, what's the most important influence upon your achievement? And by far and away, the biggest thing that they spoke about, the importance of being, was the relationship they had with their teacher in the classroom. Their families, when we spoke to 200 odd parents from 5 secondary schools, told us the same thing. The most important influence upon the achievement of our children is the relationship they and we have with their teachers and the school principals and leaders. The school principals said the same thing. They also said that the most important impact was that. What did the teachers say? The teachers said it was actually the children that were at fault. It was the children's problem. It's just like the rental car agent who said, didn't you book it? Didn't you specify? They were saying it's something wrong with the child. They explained to us that it was the culture of the child, that it was the families who didn't care. It was the blaming. They blamed everybody, except they didn't engage and include themselves in the blame. And the sad thing about it was they were very unhappy about the situation. They were very upset about not being able to engage with young Māori people, but they couldn't see that this was actually causing the problem. Because what I'd suggest to you is that is the central problem that we're dealing with. And I know Stronger Smarter is very much focused upon this, raising expectations, because this is all about deficit theorising, deficit thinking, thinking of the deficiencies that people have and creating from that no solutions. Because when you ask people, so what's the solution to this? They throw their hands up in the air and they say, well, what can I do? What can I do? I'm powerless to do anything. Just like the man at the airport. Couldn't do anything because the system was too great. Nothing could be done. This is what it sounds like in a classroom. I had a group of 6 teachers together and asked them about the educational achievement of Maori children in their classroom. And they said this: we never see any excellence in this class. They're not motivated and therefore they don't achieve. They need to have the language of the subject. What do we do if they don't have it? So on. I'll just flick through so you can read them yourselves. These are all deficit statements, all statements of low expectation, and all statements that are stated by frustrated, upset teachers, by the way. The last one, of course, the classic one, send them to the Māori teachers, they'll know what to do, is an abrogation of responsibility in a very frustrated way, in a very frustrated manner, where the teachers themselves have virtually given up. Now, coming to solutions, I want to suggest to you a number of principles that are important, that are foundational to Kotahitanga and I believe also to Stronger Smarter. And that is that establishing working relationships with Indigenous children and their families is but part of a wider educational reform. I've been asked to talk about working with communities and families this morning. And establishing family relationships shouldn't be considered within an agreed to set of principles. It should also have an agreed to purpose. It also should have a theoretical model, needs to be at the basis of it all, and there needs to be a working framework within it, the establishment of it. I'm going to go through these quickly because I'm sure you're aware of these already. The agreed to principles. Educators will not resort to deficit explanations of Indigenous children's and their families' performance. Unless teachers and educators are agreed to this principle, then very little will change. And believe me, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and the more and more I see of it, unless that particular understanding is fundamental in the belief structures and systems of educators, then I don't think no progress can take place. The second one. All educators be agentic in their relationships with Indigenous children and their families. That is, understanding themselves to be able to make a difference. The second scenario of the corporate example I gave. Educators will treat children as if they were their own. Treat children as you would want other people to treat yours is one of the very important principles that I believe that will make a difference for our children's education. And establishing relationships take place and create problem shifting and solution seeking beyond the school. The main purpose is our actions will be focused on improving the educational experiences and achievement of Indigenous children. The third thing is that a guiding theoretical principle is needed, model is needed, and there's a model in a book, one of the books I've written recently called Scaling Up, and it says there are 7 dimensions of reform in any school, and there should be goals established about improving the achievement of Indigenous children. There should be a change in the pedagogy that takes place, and leadership should be about supporting the changes in pedagogy. Institutional reform should be engaged in order to change the pedagogy that takes place. The leadership should be distributed throughout the school so that it is aimed towards improving the pedagogies in the school. And the spread should be to all teachers and to communities and families. And evidence, it should be done on the basis of evidence. Unless it's done on that basis, how would we know if we're going to be making progress at all? And ownership, schools must own the goals. So that's a model, and I'm going to be talking about a subset of spread. And I want to now talk about the topic of today, which is educators need to be provided with supportive structure to understand how to establish family relationships. I'm going to show you 3 cycles of engagement. The first cycle starts with engaging with families and parents in conversations about their experiences of education, just as we did with Te Kotahitanga. And there then moves on to looking at the funds of knowledge that communities have, and then from that we see the development of a pedagogy that is going to promote the educational achievement of our children, leading to a statement back to the communities, a statement of intent, a statement of accountability, which leads back to that original conversation. So that's a cycle of engagement. It's a relational cycle that needs to take place in schools. And I'm going to talk very briefly about that cycle because I've talked about it a number of times. A number of you have heard me talk about it as well. And it's well published, and so I won't spend too much time on it. But essentially what I talk about is that central to improving the educational achievement of Indigenous children is a pedagogic change. And that's the fundamental basis of that pedagogic change. The second cycle of engagement is where you actually start diagnosing specific problems that children might have. You then start engaging parents as tutors on this matter. You then engage in a further round of conversations regarding that process, which leads back to the wider conversation that you started the whole process with. There is a third element, a third cycle of engagement I want to talk about, and that is when you have some behavioural difficulties in the school, and that is engaging families in those conversations, which then lead to families working with the school to solve these issues, which again reinforces that initial conversation that took place. Now, those 3 cycles, what I want to suggest to you is that generally where schools start is they start at the bottom. They start with the yellow cycle, and they start seeing behavioural problems as something that needs to be solved initially. And so they go straight for a behavioural situation. We find this with Maori children in New Zealand. Tremendously disproportionate numbers of Maori children are engaged in support services and psychological services, behaviour management services, resource teachers of learning and behaviour services, all these adjunct, almost paramilitary services we have around our schools, supplementary services. We find that Maori children are disproportionately put into those programs. Alternative education, we've got something like 80% of the children in alternative education in New Zealand are Māori. It's because schools go straight to that level first of all. They see the behaviour as something that needs to be modified. They don't see the behaviour as children voting with their feet or having as a result of a problem with relationships. Now, if you have a relational paradigm as your primary dominant theoretical framework for establishing improving educational achievement for Indigenous children, then you won't start with a behavioural paradigm. You won't start with behavioural solutions. You'll start at the top. Now, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine in New Zealand, I was talking to her about this the other day. She was just left being a deputy principal at a school that had 400 children. 80% of them were Māori. And I said to her, what percentage of children would actually be getting through from cycle 1 to cycle 2 to cycle 3? And she said that if you implement the pedagogic intervention that is indicated in the first cycle, the blue cycle, you will get about 80% of the children improving their educational achievement. If you then use the next cycle, it will pick up another 15 to 20% of the children. That's about the number of children who have specific reading difficulties or difficulties with numeracy and so on. You will then find, she says, that it was about 5% of the families and children in her school that actually required the last intervention. Unfortunately, it's the wrong way around in our schools. Let's look at this cycle. Let's look at this first cycle of engagement. Again, I briefly want to introduce this and just say that this is a pedagogic intervention. This means that you change the way that teachers develop caring and learning relationships with Indigenous children. as I said, Te Kotahitanga is an example of doing this, where we began with talking with Māori kids and their families, and I'm just going to show you now some of the things that the families told us. Oh, excuse me, kanurimi kia rātou. These are three of our elders, of the four elders who are the leaders of our program back in New Zealand. Ko Mate Uriwiti on the left has subsequently passed away, so just acknowledging her at this moment. And that's some of the team that are back home running the program. And this is a book that we put out of those stories of experiences of Māori children and their families, and was based upon the idea that actually families and parents and kids do actually know what's going on in schools. It's another one of the great myths of our society, is that Māori parents don't know what's going on in schools and most of all don't care. Māori people care extremely much about what goes on in schools because they didn't have a very good experience and they want their children to have a good experience. And here's some of the things they said. I'll just put them up and you can read them. So these parents are very aware of deficit thinking on the part of teachers. They also know that it's colonially located. And they know it's a form of cultural superiority, inferiority that's creating these relationships. That book that we published called Culture Speaks is full of about 30 pages of people talking about their experiences of being the parents of Indigenous children at school, and it's a very salutary experience. Now, why is it important to focus on pedagogic change? I just want to introduce you to the idea, well, if you know about effect size, I'm sure you do, and just give you an idea that effect size measurements is, if we're looking at something that is excellence, we're looking for something that has an effect over 0.6 on a scale of 0 to 1. So we're looking at anything over 0.39 or 0.4 as being acceptable, and anything above 0.6 means that it's got a large effect and it's well worth doing. And if we have a look at, this is from John Hattie's book, 2009, Visible Learning, you can see there that the quality of teaching is of the highest order, has the greatest effect size measurement that he could find in teaching, and it is 0.77. You'll also notice that very quickly just below that is teacher-student relationships, 0.72. So way above 0.6, you've got the excellent approaches to education are tied up with these particular activities. So that's why I just want to emphasise the importance of a pedagogic intervention that improves the quality of caring and learning relationships with Indigenous children. I want to now look at the second intervention. Remember, 80% of your children will be able to improve their educational achievement through the first cycle of intervention. The second cycle of intervention looks at particular diagnostic approaches and improving educational achievement through specific programs that are specifically designed to improve the educational achievement of Indigenous children. And I want to show you why is it important to actually make sure that you're solving the problem initially is if you look at this graph, you'll see two sets of bars. The first are grey, the second are black. In the grey ones, that is the pre-test, and the black one is the post-test. And what this shows us is that this is the result of a pedagogic intervention. No other intervention took place in this particular example, and we have got 100 children in the pre-test in the grey, and in this post-test there are only 50 children in that category. So if we hadn't gone through the pedagogic intervention and we'd gone straight to the literacy intervention, we would have actually done it for 100 children, but it was not needed by 100 children. Similarly, in 2005, we found the same example. Same thing about effect sizes. Okay, here's a publication produced by the New Zealand Ministry of Education. It's edited by Adrian Alton Lee, and it shows here a graph showing you the greatest impact from interventions for Māori and Indigenous children, and I'm just going to run through them now. The one that has the biggest impact, had the biggest effect, was joint teacher-parent interventions. Has an effect size of 1.81, extraordinarily high intervention effect. And what it is it's actually where researchers and professional developers have gone into the school, and when they've diagnosed that children have got literacy problems, they've actually worked with the teachers and the parents at the same time for parents to become tutors to the programs that the teachers are running. And where this has happened, you have an enormous impact. At Melville High School, one of our schools in the project, we implemented a program like this, and I'll flick down to the bottom and you can see that in 2011, the reading age has advanced in 6 weeks, had advanced by 6 months by engaging in this particular program. But remember, it was only with those children who needed the program, not with everybody. Further examples of large effect sizes is teacher-designed interactive homework with parents, and you'll see soon that regular homework with parents, where parents actually are left to monitor it themselves, actually has a negative effect size. So it's where there is a relationship established between the community and the parent and the teachers, and they work together and they're tutored together, and the parents are helped to become tutors with the work. That's when kids start to really make some difference. Approaches that have medium to small effect include parental involvement, parent-child communication about school, parent volunteering at school. Notice all these have actually got quite small effects. So these are things that parents do that are separate from what goes on in the classroom. They have an effect, but they don't have the desired effect of a very high effect. It's interesting, notice they're replacing computers putting computers in the home. Doesn't have an enormously high impact. If it were tied in with what was going on in the classroom, it would have a much greater impact. Now, have a look at those sorts of approaches that have no impact upon student outcomes. Parents being involved in the governance of schools, frequency of teacher-parent interactions, just meeting parents and teachers has a minus 0.4 negative effect size. Homework surveillance has a negative impact on achievement, student achievement. Parenting helps with homework, again, a negative impact upon achievement. Where teacher and parent relationships are less than good, again, not much in the way of gains. I want to come to the third one. Excuse me. The third one. And we're looking here at the smallest number of people, the smallest number of children who actually might need some of these programs. The third cycle of engagement is the relational strategies that include families when faced with behavioural issues. remember that effective pedagogy should be the first resort. You should be working at effective pedagogies and finding out what's going on in the classroom before engaging in a behavioural modification program. The second thing is that effective learning interventions should be the next level of call and not the other way around. And thirdly, contingency management procedures with support for parents is the way to go. I won't go on for this too much, but just to mention that quite often programs such as, what are those ones? Assertive discipline and 3 strikes and you're out. Those sorts of programs that run in a lot of our schools now. They've brought these programs in from the United States. And a lot of the problems with these programs is that they are enormously difficult, particularly for young Māori males, to cope with, because the average Māori male can have 3 strikes by morning tea on a Monday and can be out the door by lunchtime. So a lot of those programs don't give much chance for anybody to make a mistake. And our kids are quite good at making mistakes, as most of us adults are. Like putting car keys in our pockets when we're getting on the plane, that sort of thing. My heart went out to you there because I just thought, goodness me, there but for the grace of God, you know. I must admit, when I go overseas and I leave for Australia and the United States or stuff, I always check everything and make sure, you know, but boy, I felt for you there, and that's the classic one, isn't it? See, 3 strikes and you're out, and you wouldn't have got far today, you see. Restorative practices work very well with our kids, and restorative practices work very well with relationship-based pedagogies and relationship-based intervention, literacy and numeracy intervention strategies. The idea being is that young people can actually make a mistake and get a chance to rectify these mistakes. But again, I must have said it 20 times so far today, it's not everybody. Not everybody's in this boat. And it's having the opportunity to rectify, restore, go back over things and rectify things and make sure things are correct. It has an enormous impact. Hei Āwhina Mātua is a Māori program for improving, supporting. Āwhina Mātua literally means supporting parents. It's a program developed at a Pounamu Research Centre in Tauranga 10 years ago, and it's about assisting young people and their families to change behaviours. That's the sort of the picture I'm trying to create in response to the request that was given to me. What would you do? What do you think about improving the educational achievement through creating family community linkages? And I've shown you here that the hypothesis that I put in this book in 1999, that relationship-based research practices can be replicated in classrooms and in schools and in homes, so that the relationships that you establish between the families and the children in the classroom, between the children and the teachers in the classroom, can be the same model as that for improving the relationship between the teachers and the students and the families outside of the classroom, bringing those families on board as tutors or as educated adults, as educated others in the education of their children. And lastly, also working on a relationship-based pedagogy that is developing a behaviour modification program for people out in the community. Now, just to finish off, I want to look at a model that you could use to evaluate what I've been talking about. And basically, it's about a question of power. Relationships are about power, and they're about developing power in the people with whom you're working. It's about acknowledging the power that other people have and acknowledging the self-determination that other people have. And I'm suggesting to you in that book I've just showed you there's a model for re-evaluating power relationships that can be applied to working with families. And it's about, you can use this model to evaluate your own progress with establishing relationships and interactions with families. The first part of it, it's about, there's 5 letters to IBRLA. It's about initiation, benefits, representation, legitimation and accountability. The first question is about who initiates homeschool interactions, how are the relationships established and whose interests and experiences are paramount, how is power sharing indicated. So those sorts of questions, if they were the questions that were asked about the relationship that was being established, that might steer you towards that 3-tier set of interactions that I was talking about. The second question is about benefits. Who's going to benefit from the relationship? What will the benefit be? If the sole benefit of actually engaging in relationships with the community is to benefit the school, or to get rid of naughty children, or to solve behavioural problems that you're dealing with, if that's sort of the benefits, then you've got a serious problem on your hands. Whereas if the benefits are reciprocal, if they are to improve the educational achievement of the children, if they are to improve the educational usefulness of the school in relationship to the aspirations of the community members, then you're going to have some traction. Representation. Whose cultural reality is dominant? Stronger, Smarter is very keen on promoting the identity of young people. How are the relationships you're going to establish with the community and with the families? How are they going to promote? Whose cultural reality is dominant in these relationships? How is the voice of the families heard? And to what way are the families share in learning and problem solving? Are they being engaged in this stuff, or are they party to it? Are they part of the problem? What authority does the school have to establish the relationship? Whose cultural realities of authority in the interactions? These are incredibly important questions. In fact, a number of the programs that are engaged with, like to go back to some of these literacy intervention programs of talking about, pause, prompt, praise being one of them that we use a lot in our country, and it actually uses Māori elders to work with communities, to engage with them initially so as to bring them into the school in a way that will acknowledge the self-determination of the community. And the last point is, who are the participants in the interaction accountable to? How is this accountability demonstrated? And how would you know? How would you know in the schools if you're accountable, and the accountability, who are you accountable to? So those 5 points that I'm trying to suggest to you is a way that you can use to actually evaluate what you're doing. Just to go back over, just to finish off, and just say that there are 3 levels of engagement. There are 3 levels of relationality between schools and families. The first one is to use families' aspirations and experiences as a guide to changing the pedagogy in your schools. And I would suggest unless you do that, you're not going to bring up much change. Leadership, after all, the major function of leadership is to support what goes on in the classroom, to support what goes on in the school. Unless leadership can do that, unless there's a very clear focus on the pedagogic changes that are necessary, then we won't see the changes in educational performance that we're hoping to see in programs like the Kotahitanga and Stronger and Smarter. What's really important also, we need to remember that if we continue to do the same things as we're doing now, and we continue to do the same things over and over, then we'll get the same results. And I believe it was Winston Churchill or someone like that who said that the first sign of madness is doing, Albert Einstein it was, the first sign of madness is doing the same thing over and over, expecting things to change. And Goethe, a German philosopher, said that whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. So it's actually quite a serious matter here, that if we want to actually bring about a better Australia, a better New Zealand, then we actually need to not do the madness of continuing to do the same thing over and over, expecting things to change. And the most central point is actually changing what goes on in the classroom, because that's what the kids told us. makes the difference, and that's what their families told us makes the difference. The fact that teachers tell us that that's not where the difference takes place is a real problem. And I appreciate the fact that I'm probably talking to the converted in this room, but then you've got a problem when you leave here, is going back and convincing other people of this message. And that's an enormously tough message to get across, and it's an enormously long-term message. But it's something that, as Stronger, Smarter works on, as Kotahitanga works on, it's what we're on about, is actually changing that, the tide of deficit thinking, the tide of low expectations of Indigenous people. So the first level of change, as I said, is that level of change at the classroom level. The second level is to, and that'll get most of your kids going properly. That'll get most of your kids achieving. The next level is to engage in specific programs that actually makes a difference. Oh, I'll give you one bit of evidence as to why that's happening. Because what's happening in our country is that we're finding that the spread of marks that Maori children are getting in external examinations is extending enormously to the point we've got now. We used to have a spread of marks that was about 20 percentage points. We've now seen the marks increasing to about 40 percentage points. So in other words, a whole group of students are actually starting to achieve quite highly. But there's still a significant group of children that need specific interventions. So therefore we need to move on to the second cycle of engagement with them, and that is to look at the specific issues they have, with specific learning needs those children have, and then we work on that. And then the third, there's still a group of people that are having behavioural issues, so let's identify that group that actually actually got real behavioural issues, and let's work with them on behaviour modifications programs with their families in such a way that it brings about sustainable change for them as well. So that's the end of what I'll talk about. This is one of our kaumātua as well. There's our website, and the message to you is Mā te rongorawa koutou e te aki e manaki, which means may the one above look after you and guide you in your endeavours. Thank you very much for listening.
Professor Bishop, I'm from Port Augusta Secondary School, which is up near the arid lands in South Australia, and we are looking at changing the pedagogy of our teachers and using intervention programs. Have you any specific pedagogy that you would say was good to try and introduce to teachers who've perhaps been teaching in the one school in the same way for 15, 20 years, as well as having graduates coming out with all these wonderful ideas and going, oh, well, I've got to concentrate on the new Australian curriculum, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I can't waste time doing this other stuff you're talking about? Does that make sense?
Absolute sense. Absolute sense. It's crucial. It's a central question, isn't it? I mean, everybody's concerned about the Australian New Zealand curriculum, of course. I mean, there are stuff, of course we are. The thing is that if you're engaged in battle with children, though, it's very difficult to actually teach anything. So it's probably best to actually get onto the same learning wavelength, because basically, 99% of kids want to learn. Probably 100% of kids want to learn. They want to achieve. In fact, I've been told a number of times when I've interviewed young people, about the importance of education. So they know very much about the importance of education. Indigenous people know, I think more than any other group in the society, about the value of education, because they know it's the way out of the poverty. It's the way out of poverty. Because no government's going to get them out of poverty, no other group's going to do it. It's going to be, one of the major reasons is through education. How are you going to bring about change in a pedagogic way? Well, the central thing that, if you have a look at their website that was on the screen there, and if you have a look at some of the publications we've put out, quite simply, to put it in a nutshell, it's about supporting teachers to actually move away. Well, there's three things that teachers need to do to change their pedagogy. One is they've got to actually implement anti-deficit theorising in their practice. That's the first thing they've got to do. And agentic thinking. And you've actually got to make that into a verb and say, I'm going to implement this in everything that I do. So in other words, I'm going to greet young Indigenous people, and I'm going to show them that I believe that they can learn, that they are capable, fully capable of everything, high expectations. I'm going to show that. The second thing is I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to establish, I'm going to create caring and learning relationships with these young people. And then the third thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to establish dialogic interactive programs with these young people. Now, one is predicated upon, I'll show you tomorrow, I've got another wee talk to do tomorrow, and I'll show you tomorrow some of the foundational data for this idea, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow as well, okay? That's a really good time to do it, because it's actually, I'm talking about the use of evidence and stuff, and so I'll give you an example of it there. But it's effectively, it's moving away from transmission mode of teaching and moving towards more interactive dialogic approaches to teaching, and it's creating learning relationships with young people that's based upon anti-deficit thinking. It's very clear what to do, and we can actually demonstrate exactly what to do. You know, and what's more, when you teach in that way, you get through the curriculum twice as quick, because what you do is you engage all the brains in the classroom. You're the only one, generally in traditional classrooms, the only brain that's working is the teachers. Everybody else is in reception mode. Good question. Any other quick questions? Don't ask him.
Thanks, Professor Bishop, for your address, and thanks just for being here. I'd be interested in your advice to colleagues in the room who are principals, teachers, or regional directors, or those kinds, even parents who come across the saying from other colleagues or other people in schools who say, oh, we've tried that, but it doesn't work, or those people who say, oh, we've tried everything and nothing works. What is your response to that?
Well, they can't have. It's a hell of a big question, but it's that deficit thinking again. It's just sort of, no, these people are hopeless, there's nothing you can do about them. Well, okay, my answer to that would be to get into an in-depth conversation with children, families, teachers, and their parent and the principals, and see what is actually engaged in education, what's going on in the education. I'll tell you a good example. I went to a school recently, and the deputy principal had actually got all the teachers in the school. She'd interviewed them all very quickly and just said, very briefly, and just said to them all, so what are the biggest influences upon Maori achievement? And they all told her what it was, and she typed it all up. And she put it out as a series of A4 statements and on big sort of sheets of paper. Then she gave it out at a staff meeting, anonymously, and she read it all out, and they looked at it, and the staff all got it sometime later, and then the staff all read the sort of stuff, and the staff all said, where did you get this from? This is all negative racist stuff. This is all about, Maori kids are no use, their parents don't care, and so on and so forth. Come to school with a big chip on their shoulder. They're well balanced, they've got got a chip on each shoulder, that sort of thing. And the deputy principal, the teachers were aghast at it all. They said, this is terrible stuff. And the deputy principal said, this is what I gathered from interviewing you people last term. It's from this school. You might need to do something like that. You might need to shake people up a wee bit, in the privacy of your own home sort of stuff. You might need to actually shake people a bit. When we were doing the original narratives of experience, we went to a school. I'll give you an example of this. We went to one school and the kids told us, we said, what's it like to be a Maori kid in this school? And the kids said, come and we'll show you. And they took us outside and they said, you watch this. And outside on the playground, there were 3 groups of kids sitting around in circles, and they were smoking cigarettes. They weren't allowed to be doing this, of course, but they were. And there was a group of Pākehā kids here, European kids. There was a group of Pacific Island kids, and there was a group of Maori kids furthest away. And 2 teachers came out on duty. And they walked past the Pākehā group, cigarette smoke coming up. They walked past the Pacific Island group, and they went to the Maori group, and they broke the Maori group up. And they took them away for detentions and stuff. And we all sat there and said, my God, Father. And they said, wait. 20 minutes later, this is lunchtime, 20 minutes later, the groups had reformed, the smoke was rising again, And the bell had gone for half-time break and lunchtime, and 2 different teachers came out, randomly selected teachers came out, and they walked past the group of Pākehā kids. They walked past the group of Pacific Island kids, and they went to the group of Maori kids, and they broke the group up and they took them off the detentions again. And the kids turned to us and they said, see, that's what it's like to be a Maori kid in this school. When we then took that group of teachers from that school away to a workshop, we showed them those stories. We had it written down, we gave them that story, and they looked at us and they said, this is racism, this is terrible, where'd you get this from? And we said it was from your school. They were horrified. Might have to do something like that. The impact of the kids' stories is absolutely, without doubt, the biggest thing that has a major impact upon teachers. And the impact of other teachers' stories too. The number of times that teachers have looked at us and said, gee, this is shocking stuff, and we don't want to read this stuff. Who says this? I might say that. I say that sometimes. Gee, maybe I should think a bit differently, eh? It's not a matter of confronting people. It's not a matter of going...
Thank you, Russell. Can we just put our hands together again for Professor Russell Bishop? We do really appreciate your time to come over from New Zealand, and you can rest easy knowing that we've hired a car for Russell while he's here, so he won't be needing to drive anywhere.